Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright.
Yo guys, what is up? Max in a Wonderlands video, and today we are going over BlightBreaker. Now, this is an evolution of the Spore Explosion build, where Spore Explosion was Spore Warden plus Berserker. This is Spore Warden plus Blightcaller, and with some new gear, some new mechanics, we can do some absolutely insane damage. This is the highest I've ever hit with a gun damage build, being 236 million. While that was a lot of RNG involved in that, this build is capable of just some absolutely obscene things. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. So I have probably done like 200 parasite kills just optimizing this build and trying to figure out which skills worked best and how to do the absolute most damage. So the core concept of this build is that we're going to be able to shoot our weapon, like a sticky weapon like this. Let's see, do we do any big damage? There is a 42 million. Okay, so how the build works is basically we're going to shoot our Torgue weapons. I like using Torgue weapons on this build. Apply a ton of debuffs, activate a bunch of damage increases, and then when we pull the trigger on the weapon, we're going to absolutely destroy whatever we shot at. Now, this works for bossing and mobbing, and there's a little bit different gear for both. So to start us off, you're going to want Torgue weapons. My absolutely favorite of them is the Ludite pistol. Now, this can come in ×2 and ×3 projectiles. You're going to want a ×3 because it reads crossbolts deal 6% increased damage for each crossbolt stuck in the target. So more pellets equals more crossbolts. And that is our first kind of global damage increase that we're going to be getting on this build. Next up, we're using both the Spore Warden and the Blightcaller, which we're going to be able to get two big debuffs on targets. Our first one is Wrath of Nature. Whenever the Fate Maker deals ability damage to an enemy, the affected enemy takes increased damage. So this, I mean, I'd love to get a skill or class mod with 6 out of 3 or 3 out of 3 here, so I could get 6 out of 3, but 40% damage increase is great. Next up, we've got Bogged Down. Now, this is where the build really shines because we used to have to use a class mod called the Cape of Tides to be able to soak enemies. Now we don't need that because we've got Bogged Down. Dealing non-status effect poison damage has a chance to create a water nova, soaking our targets. This is going to increase our frost and lightning damage by 50%. Okay, so we've got two big debuffs. Next up, our big damage. Our big damage is a lot of it is going to come from ability damage. We've got Geist in the Shell, which is going to do ability damage, 49% of our gun critical hit damage, and if we've got mobs around us, we've got Play the Angles, which is also going to do ability damage. So both of these things are going to get increased by ability damage. We've got a ton. I've got 63% increased ability damage here just on this alone. And then we're using a Buffmeister with Ka-Chow. Ka-Chow is going to give us, I think, 80% increased ability damage there. So we're buffing up. We're like giving ourselves a lot of damage multipliers. We're giving ourselves a bunch of ability damage. And by the time we pull this trigger or reload our weapon, we're going to just do a ton of damage. Now, how to apply all these debuffs? We're using the Spore Fuse enchant. For 10 seconds after activating Barrage, gun damage has a 25% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 30% of the damage dealt. This was slightly nerfed. It's still very strong, but we're going to be using this to proc a bunch of poison explosions on enemies, plus Geist is going to be doing our poison. So we're not really focusing super hard on poison. We're mainly using poison as a way to increase our damage of our other things. Now, the best class mod for this build is the Mosquito's Mantle. I made a video going over this the other day, but it basically gives any of our damage that can critical hit a chance to double dip in all of our damage multipliers, except for the crit damage multiplier again, and it just leads to some absurd damage. We've got so many different damage triggers going off, from our ricochets to our Geist to our Spore Explosion with multiple pellet weapons, that we're going to get a really good chance of proccing this Mosquito's Mantle, and when it does, it's going to hit for some crazy damage. Now, like if you're gonna hit a 40 million or a 100 million or a 200 million is kind of random off of what it could trigger off of, and I very like get like inconsistent damage numbers, but it's always consistently very high. Now if this class mod does get nerfed or gutted, the next best class mod that I was using before I got the Mosquito's Mantle is something like this, the Corrupted Plate Mail, which will give us an extra chance of proccing our ricochets and our Geist in the Shells by splitting our damage and giving us the dark magic damage increase. So Corrupted Plate Mail, I believe second best, Mosquito's Mantle best, and for the actual skills you're going to look up for it, you're going to want Spore, Warden, Blightcaller. This specs really well. I think the God roll is specking +3 into Wrath of Nature, but it specs into both Affinity, which is more ability damage, and it also specs into Geist in the Shell, which is also really good. So whatever roll you get on this class mod, it's going to be helpful, but I do think the God roll is +3 Wrath of Nature. I unfortunately don't have that. I only got +1. But yeah, my class mod's pretty terrible in the grand scheme of things, and we're still putting out nutty damage. Other weapons I like using are the Body Rocker, the Deodin, which is actually a like companion weapon, but we're specking so much gun damage, and this thing does gun damage, that it actually works really well. And then the Spore Explosion. Now the reason the Luddite I think is so good compared to some of the other options is just because its single pellets hit so hard, and we're going to want a big damage number to then double dip in all of our other things. So like a bunch of little chances are really nice, but they don't quite hit as hard. So bigger like damage weapons are definitely going to work better on this build. Next up, I've got a Chaotic Peg Leg. Basically just using this, if I melee something, I'm going to get some reload speed and movement speed, which is always nice to have. But we're using on action skill start gun damage, which we're going to constantly keep up with Barrage. And once again, a lot of our things trigger off of the percentage of our gun critical hit. Both play the angles and Geist in the Shell are going to deal more damage if we deal more gun damage. So that's why we're specking that in gun damage. For bossing, the Cursed Wit is just a must-have. It's 100% more damage. I'm using increased frost damage on spellcast on mine. However, for mobbing, I use the Body Rune. The Body Rune is going to give us fire damage and a percentage back of our health, which is super nice because it's going to give us our health back on kill. And then I use a Harbinger. I've got this one right here. This is a Harbinger amulet that when I activate my action skill, I'm going to get 50% of my ward back over 2 seconds. And with the Body Rune, whenever I reload, or with this enchant, whenever I reload, I get a charge back of Barrage. So as I'm killing enemies and using my action skill, I'm getting both health and shield back, which is really nice and gives us some nice tankiness. However, you're definitely going to want to use the Cursed Wit and something that isn't the Harbinger, because the Harbinger will give you shield back for bossing. And lastly, I am using a Buffmeister. I've messed around with a lot of different elements of the Buffmeister. There's two real great options here. You can use Shock or Lightning. The reason we're using that is because we've got Bogged Down, and this is going to increase the damage that the Buffmeister does on our pellets by 50%. You can use it in Cryo as well. I like Lightning more because then we've got a bunch of different elements, so enemies with multiple health bars are way easier to kill. So my favorite is Lightning. You can use a Dark Magic one and then grab the skill Worst Curse, which gives you more ability damage and spell damage, but I found that I really like having Flawless Edge and putting these points here, just because when I am mobbing, I'm going to have my shield up constantly, and this Flawless Edge is really nice for all damage dealt, because I won't have a Cursed Wit on when I'm taking advantage of this. I forgot to mention, but I'm using 2 Sharksbane rings simply because they roll with the highest gun damage in the game. If you can get reload speed on them, that is even better. If you're reloading more, you're going to get Barrage more, and if you're getting more Barrage, you're getting more Harbinger. So reload speed is also really nice to have on this, as well as critical hit chance and damage for the weapons that you're using is really nice. Let's get into the skill tree now. Next up, this is our skill tree. I wouldn't change anything on the Spore Warden spec. You could move 1 point Medicinal Mushroom over to Windrunner for more fire rate and movement speed. However, getting picked up when you're in fight for your life, because you can die to just random things every once in a while, is very nice to have. Blightcaller tree, you really don't need Wraith Mail. It's an awesome skill, but if you're using the Harbinger, you're going to be getting your shield back all the time, so there's really no point for that. So Harbinger with Flawless Edge is a better pairing in my opinion. The only real thing that you could do is use Worst Curse if you wanted more ability damage here with a Dark Magic. I like using the Shock one, my Shock Buffmeister though, for extra damage with Bogged Down, and then I like specking Frostbite. The reason I'm going Frostbite is because all of my weapons are Frost, and I get increased critical hit chance. Critical hit chance in this game with guns is not great. basically you're going to want to hit headshots. Like, we've got a bunch of critical hit increases, and my gun critical hit chance right now is 11.4%. So really just like aim for the head and you should be fine. The reason for that is a lot of our damage that we do, both the Mosquito's Mantle, the Geist in the Shell, and Play the Angles all proc off of gun critical hits. And while there's a chance to do gun critical hits on body shots, you can guarantee gun critical hits on headshots. We do not need Stabomancer for this setup as long as you're hitting headshots. So Frostbite's nice for that extra critical hit chance, but yeah, just aim for the head and you should be fine. For our hero points, I've got crit damage spec'd out, crit chance spec'd out. You could honestly move these crit chance points into spell cooldown if you're confident in heading headshots. But crit damage, crit chance, and spell cooldown. We don't need skill cooldown because we're using the barrage enchant when we're mobbing, which will give our bow back immediately. We're not relying on status damage. And the background that I would recommend for this build if you're starting a new class is Village Idiot. Village Idiot will give you more crit damage, a bunch more, and a lot of our triggers for our big damage. I have my skill tree unspec'd right now, but a lot of them are based off of the damage that you deal when you critical hit, so more critical hit damage is kind of a no-brainer. Guys, that is going to be it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will have the save file in the Discord. I was working on this build for a while. It was actually a build that I made prior to the Blightcaller launch in some of my early access, and I've been really enjoying it. There's so many different ways you could play this build, but with Torg stickies and some cryo damage and just like, it's silly. It's just silly how much damage this build can put out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.